Welcome back, everybody. We hope that you enjoyed the last episode. And as always, today I am here with Father Tone.
Hello, everyone.
And today we have a interesting topic. It comes from a class that I'm taking. I'm taking a Christology class, and
Yes,
in that class, we're basically looking at Jesus, who he was, is, and is to come, and always kind of like trying to understand Jesus's thoughts and actions, or look deeper into like what Jesus meant or did. And it's been very interesting to me, and we're doing that through reading a book that Pope Benedict XVI published called Jesus of Nazareth. Father Tone, are you familiar with that book?
so I have read that book. So Jesus of Nazareth. Pope Benedict published in three books. So it's
Mm-hmm.
going from his baptism to his resurrection. So it's a very good book, series of books. So if our listeners
Yes,
are interested in Pope Benedict and would like to know more about that, highly recommended to read those books. Mhm.
absolutely. So we were actually just reading about Jesus's like death and him anticipating his death, and yet in class, our professor, she posed three important questions regarding Jesus's final moments in his death, and I just thought we had such a good talk in class and conversation in class that I learned a lot from, and I thought it was very interesting. That I thought it'd be cool to bring it to this podcast.
Oh, wonderful. And it's so funny, Ben, because like on Sunday, so we had the like Shepherd of Jerusalem, they selling a lot of religious items. And it's so providential that like there's one gentleman painted a very nice crucifix for us to
Mm.
put in a narthex. And then when we talk about what topic that we are going to speak for this podcast, and then you just brought it up, the Christology topic. So I said, wow, God truly wants us to talk about this topic. So so excited.
Yeah, it's great. So the first question that our teacher kind of posed to the class was, did Jesus anticipate and know of his death before it was going to happen?
Hmm.
And what I kind of jumped to was the agony in the garden. Jesus is sitting in the garden, praying to God the Father, asking God the Father, like, I know I must do this, but why? It's going to be challenging and it's going to be really hard. That he's going to have to go through all this pain and suffering of dying on the cross, like the most humiliating way to die back then and the most painful way to die. And that my professor said that that was like a good thing to think about and very true, but you could realize that Jesus knew of his death even before um even before the agony in the garden.
Hmm.
Jesus would have known of his death because of like it's very clear throughout the gospel that he's extremely familiar with the prophecies,
Hmm.
and he would know that the prophets were calling upon for him to die the way that he did, which is
Hmm.
very contradictory to what many first century Jews thought the Messiah would be, because they thought
Hmm.
the Messiah would be this great warlord, restore Israel to its glory, and yet Jesus comes here and he gives like the complete opposite. He
Hmm.
says like, no, we're going to save the world by turning the other cheek. My death is going to save the world. But we could see that this kind of leads up to him knowing about his death before it happens.
Hmm. Yes, it's a very interesting point that that you answered the question by bringing back the experience that Jesus had in the agony of the garden, right? So you mentioned about yes, Jesus know what is going on, the suffering that he's gonna partake, and then ask the Father to take it away. But like very right after that sentence, he said, "But not my will, but your will," right? So
Mm-hmm.
over there, we can see the two wills in the Lord, the human will and divine will, that are so in line with one another. right? At first, right, our human will, we don't want to go through suffering because suffering is painful, right? But then the divine will, Jesus united with the Father's will. So it's interesting because it brought us back to the will of God since the beginning of creation, right? When God created creation out of nothing, because He's God, so He knows everything, right? You know, we're gonna eat that apple, we're gonna sin, right? We're gonna sin, and because out of love that God created the world, and He didn't want to create the world and let the world be, right? But He want to involve like presence in that world. So when God the Father, um, for knowledge, right, see everything happen all all at once, like created the humanity is gonna fall, so he's gonna send his son for the sake of saving the humanity, or bring humanity back to the relationship that he had intended since the beginning. So yes, I'm totally in line with you, Ben. Like Jesus anticipated everything. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
And actually, one class in Ben I taught, and yeah, we talk about like can God created an angel to die instead of Jesus himself, or
Mm.
created a perfect man instead of Jesus himself have to be incarnated and then have to go through all the suffering. And my professor, yeah, uh, give us time to discuss, and then at the end we say, yeah, no, right? Because if God created a perfect man or a perfect angel to die for us, by the fact of being created, right? That creature already owe to God something, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's impossible to do so. That's why Jesus himself, the second person of the Trinity, have to be incarnated and then die for, so that at the end, right, God give God a gift, a perfect gift. Like, I don't owe you anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, where our conversation led to, in the agony of garden, to Jesus's will lining up with the Father's will. And this is where it gets very tricky Trinitarian theology, because in the agony, it says Jesus says like, "Oh, take this cup away from me," knowing like his death is coming and knowing it was going to be very challenging for him. And um, it said that Jesus' will, his human will, lines up with his divine will and God the Father's will. And um, I guess like the way that I kind of think about it is he's saying this, but he knows he's going to have to do this, and he's willing to do it, and it's part of his will because he wants to save humanity. He wants to save the world, and he knows
Mhm,
that's the only way that he can.
mhm. Yes, yes. And by the way, to the people who are listening to our podcast, so whenever we have a challenging questions, right, don't give up, right? just just go and ask. Or, for example, the conversation that Ben and I are having, right, without just like not talking about the questions and what do we think about it. It's tough to have our mind grabbed around a topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for the interruption, but
No, that's perfect. And then like the final way that Jesus would know about his like death and like just knowing how it was going to happen was looking at the people close around him, looking at some of the great prophets, especially looking at John the Baptist. John the Baptist was beheaded, not long before Jesus's, during Jesus's life here. Jesus knew and saw how John the Baptist, who was preaching for Jesus, how he was treated, and he knew that if John the Baptist died like that, he would have to die like that.
yeah. So you bring a very good point over there as well, Ben. Like, So history, right? The Old Testament are so important, right? Because Jesus more often he quoted the Psalm, right? The Psalm that you
Mhm.
talk about like later on. We're gonna talk about it, but
Yeah.
or the prophets, right? So he knows the scripture so well that his humanity, right, knows about his divinity right away through the learning the scripture, through the revelation that the Lord God the Father reveals himself through God the Son, and with seeing everything. Yeah, in Christology we say, yeah, we have high Christology and low Christology.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
for our high Christology is like the Christology saying that yes, Jesus knows exactly what is going on in an instant, and then low Christology is like Jesus is unpacking his divinity gradually. So with the high Christology and low Christology will help us to understand the divinity and the humanity of the Lord better. So
Yeah, absolutely. And great like segue into the next question was your mentioning of Jesus being very familiar with the Old Testament. And the second question that our teacher posed to us was, did Jesus suggest that his final death would bring forth God's final reign?
mhm,
And what I instantly thought of is yes, because look at how Jesus talked about the temple. And for first century Jews, the temple was something extremely important. It was, where they would see, like that's where God Himself dwelt, and there's a lot of like symbolic meaning behind the temple. But when
mhm,
Jesus said He would destroy the temple and resurrect it within 3 days, He wasn't talking about the actual temple that was there.
mhm,
He's talking about Himself. His destroying of the temple was Him dying, and His
mhm,
rebuilding of the temple was His resurrection, and that symbolized just kind of like the big shift
mhm,
in the world and in how like a lot of the Old Testament or Jewish laws would be looked at from his time.
mhm. Yeah. So with that question, wow, it's a very interesting question. Jesus suggest that his death would bring the final reign? Uh, well, I think it's like eternally it is the will of God the Father when He created the world. So for me, if we translate it that way, yes, it is right. When Jesus talked about like all things are delivered unto me by my Father, and no one know the Son except the Father, and no one know the Father except the Son, and whoever the Son would reveal him. So with that, right? Only God the Father know God the Son, and only God the Son
Hmm.
know God the Father. And how do we come to know God the Son? Because, well, God the Father revealed God the Son to us and illuminate our minds, right? So that we come to know the divinity of the Lord. So with that, I think yes, eternally God has that in His mind that the Son would would save the world by his death and bring humanity back to a perfect relationship with God the Father. And yeah, and it should happen that way. That way. Uh, and what I
Yeah.
say, perfect suggestion that, yeah, Jesus have.
Hmm. Yeah, and kind of going back to what I was saying about the temple was you could kind of see when Jesus went to the temple and we see him like throwing, the tables and all that. It has to do with that was kind of like his final plea or his final cry
Mhm,
to the world, saying, "Listen to what I'm saying.
mhm.
Listen to what's going to happen." But obviously, we could see that kind of fell on deaf ears, and people didn't really grasp his message, and that ultimately led to his death. But he knew that that was going to happen.
Yes, it's very interesting. Yes, because Jesus, like, so his ministries, he more than often, right? Talk about his death and resurrection. Like the Son of Man will suffer, and then on the third day he will rise. And the disciples and the people who have listened to the Lord didn't like. They said, "Yeah, I know it. He's talking about that again." But then people just ignore it, right?
Hmm.
Or maybe not be able to understand the fully mission of the Messiah that he has to go through. And it's very interesting about that. Like when you talk about the temple, destroy this temple in 3 days, I will build it up. And yeah, Jesus revealed the whole thing. It's just like us to be able to sit down and reflect about that or listen, right?
Hmm.
So with that, actually, it brought us to a very nice reflection about our daily life, right? When we listen to the gospel, do we take time to reflect about it, or we just say, "All right, it's another familiar
Yeah.
or familiar statement. Why do I have to bother?" And then at the end, we just say, "Wow, the scripture or the readings that I have read before is actually applying to my life," and we just
Hmm.
like freak out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the third and final question that my professor posed to the class was, did Jesus realize the impact of his death?
Mhm,
And um, my instant thought was yes, because look at how he talked while he was hanging from the cross. It
mhm,
seems like he was kind of like setting up some things for that would happen or that people would realize. And to that, I look to some of the words that Jesus said.
mhm,
So the first like phrase is "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing."
mhm,
And with that, it's many great theologians from all different areas of the world or times of the world has
mhm,
said that, you know, during that moment, Jesus himself took upon the sins of the world,
mhm,
and Jesus asking for forgiveness of the whole world's sins. He's feeling the weight of those sins on him while
mhm,
he's hanging from the cross, and
mhm.
it's hard for him to even like muster out these words of, "Father, forgive these sins, forgive these people who are crucifying me, forgive all the sins in the world." um, but it's through my death, through his death, that he's forgiving these sins.
Mhm. Yes, with that vein, we can see a perfect love right over there to lay down one life for the other people, right? Like you say, Jesus doesn't have any sin, but willing to take all the blame, all the sin of the world on his shoulders so that he can offer it back to God the Father as a gift, right? I'm willing to die for those people, so forgive them. And from there, if we watch the movie, right, it's easier for us to picture because we have pictures in front of us
Hmm.
when we see Jesus was agonized on the cross, right? And then it gives us a more vivid image, right? How he struggled with that, right? How he was struggling with like being able to stabilize on the cross. Like he tried to breathe, he tried to like I don't know all the pain that that portrayed on the cross when Jesus was there. It just like say sins are real.
Hmm.
It's very painful to deal with sins, and it's just like it's amazing to see like Jesus said, "I'm willing to take on those burden for you, so that you guys are gonna be free." So this is amazing about that. So yeah,
Yeah.
forgive for they know not what they do. Mhm,
Hmm. Absolutely. And then the next kind of line I looked at or phrase that Jesus said was, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
mhm,
And if we just like read the text, this line would be very confusing
mhm,
because um, it sounds like Jesus is saying, "God, why have you left me?" But he's God.
mhm,
Uh, but in reality, that's not what it means at all. Is the first century Jews would have every single psalm memorized,
mhm,
and they would pray the psalms daily. but when praying the psalm, they would say the first line out loud,
Mhm.
and that kind of implied like the rest of the psalm that you were praying.
Mhm.
So we could see Jesus in this time of great suffering, he's still praying, and he's saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Which is the first line of Psalm 22.
Mhm.
And the beginning of that psalm talks about how God has always been with Israel, the chosen people, from the beginning of time. Even after they felt like God left them, that they were alone, God still provided for them. God was still there for them. And then, like, later down in the psalm, it continues. There's a line in there: "They divide my clothes among themselves, and for my clothes they cast lots."
Mhm.
And we see that happen while Jesus is hanging on the cross, where the Romans are playing games to
Mhm.
get Jesus' clothes, and then the rest of the psalm kind of serves as a call for everyone to serve God, to serve God, do His will in the world. And this is just very interesting because in Jesus' final moments, in Jesus' final words, he's still preaching God. He's still evangelizing. He's still trying to get people to come to God. And Father, you said when we were talking about earlier that you could relate this kind of like the desolation that Jesus has felt on the cross.
Mhm.
So you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Yes, yes, yes. Before that, can I comment on the song that you just quoted?
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yes. So you just blow my mind when you refer to that song, because when we talk about the importance of the history, right? So the song they just like give us, I give the humanity away what is gonna happen when the Messiah came, right?
Hmm.
And and I don't know if people like when they pray the psalm and then when they see the Lord, do they make those connections? Because the details of the psalm, right, is so clear that like, yeah, the Messiah is gonna go through that and that from the detail to casting the lot to take the clothes or the clothes of the Lord, right? It's so detailed. And yes, so from the cross, when you mentioned the statement that the Lord said, my God, why thou forsaken me?" So with that, like you say, Jesus still praying, and over there we see the contradiction, or not the contradiction per se, but the unification of humanity, right? For human being, we have the tendency uh, to not trusting the Lord, uh, but at the same times, Jesus showing us that like, yes, the opening of the psalm is my God, why hast thou forsaken me? But then later on he unpacked, right? The Lord is kind and merciful and faithful to his covenant. He's gonna bring us back. So with that, the Lord reveal us our humanity, and then at the same times, and then when he revealed to us the humanity, he identified himself with us. And then later on, he said, "But wow, guys, we have to trust in the Lord, right?" So he associate himself to the divine. So we can see like the humanity and divinity on the cross very clearly over there, right? Humanity has lack of faith in the Lord, but divinity like always trust from the Lord, right? The divinity in the Lord always trust in God. So he's trying to lift our nature to that level that we can be able to completely trust the Lord.
Wow, that's definitely, yeah, that's amazing. Um, so the next kind of words that Jesus spoke that I thought about was uh, comes from John's Gospel, where Jesus says to John and Mary, "Woman, here's your son," and then later, "Here's your mother."
Mhm.
And that kind of shows, we often refer to Mary as the mother of the church
Mhm.
and the mother of all. And it kind of shows that Jesus was setting up the church. I mean, we already saw that Jesus kind of passed the keys on to Peter earlier in the Gospels.
Mhm.
But this is saying, like, John, you and the other apostles, who are the whole universal church at that point,
Mhm.
you and the other apostles, here's your mother. Look to her as your mother. And Mary, here are your sons. Look to them as your sons. And we can
Mhm.
even see that in the world today, in the church today. And I just find that completely amazing.
Yes, yes, beautiful to see the interesting that the Lord, like between the disciples and Mother Mary, right, embracing one another as like a mother and sons, and with that, when I reflected about the sorrowful mother, when seeing her beloved son die on the cross, um, it's very interesting because like as a mother at that time, right? She only have one channel to pray to God the Father, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then when Jesus entrusts our care to Mother Mary, when we are in the time of desolation, we not only have God, but we can run to Mother Mary, right? Who knows the agony, who knows the sorrowful, he knows everything, and it's beautiful, and we
Mm-hmm.
can see that as well when you mention about like the mother of the church, and the church is a combination of everyone, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you talked about going to Mary when feeling agony, that just brought back memories from this past summer, where we were teaching the mysteries of the Rosary, and there was one lesson where it talked about how Mary felt every single pain that Jesus felt on the cross.
Hmm.
Mary felt the suffering that Jesus felt. It went through Mary as well as through Jesus. And I remember when I was doing research while making, my lesson plan, I
Hmm.
stumbled upon something that said many theologians agree and believe that any other person in this world would have died from basically heartbrokenness and the suffering that Mary did. But because Mary is so strong and so special,
Hmm.
she was able to live and continue on, like kind of her what God called her to be.
Hmm. Yes, yes. So we can follow the example of Mother Mary.
Exactly. And so the final words of the cross that Jesus said from the cross was, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit."
Hmm.
And this kind of relates to the first and second question, and we see Jesus's will falling in line with the will of the Father. So, Father Tone, I'm asking, and I'm wondering, where do you kind of see the alignment of that phrase in the first and second question that was posed?
Yeah, so Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. So if we go back to the conversation that we have been having with the first and the second question, right? In the agony of the garden, we can see like, yes, Jesus said, yeah, it's tough. Why do I have to go through? But not my will, but your will. And then for the second question, we see like, um, yes, destroy the temple, and then 3 day, uh, I will build it up, and and other things. So over here, it's just like a sense of surrender, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, all right, I know that at the end, your will bring to the perfection, bring to the fulfillment of everything. So, Father, I trust my entire being, my entire self to you, as I give my spirit to you. So over there, it's just like a so beautiful statement that the Lord made, because over there we can see the unification of God the Son and God the Father will are in line with one another. God the Son trust God the Father completely, and just let God the Father do the mighty work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we talked about this, or when we were going over what we were talking about, you said that there was a lot of comparisons between Isaac and Abraham. and their will's kind of aligning with the Father. So you want to talk about that for a little bit too?
Yes, yes. So, sure. So, talk about the importance of the history, right? So, in the Old Testament, the famous story of the sacrifice of Isaac, right? So, father and Abraham, right? He brought Isaac to the mountain and be sacrificed, and over there, Isaac doesn't know the will of Abraham, but he has faith on Abraham that, well, Abraham listened to the Lord, and the Lord is the one that we are worshiping. So we just follow the will of the Lord. So by Isaac listening and obeying or following Abraham's will is a foreshadow of the sacrifice of our Lord, right? And over there, when we talk about like, can God created a perfect man or a perfect angel to die for humanity instead of God the Son? Over there, we can tell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, even if Isaac willing to be the sacrificial lamb or to die, but the Lord say, well, it is not enough, right? Because Isaac is the one that the Lord has created. So he owed to the Lord a gift of being created already. So over here, over there, right? We can see that, and then right now we are talking about the crucifixion of the Lord, and he willing to take it on so that at the end he can give a perfect gift to God the Father because he doesn't owe anything. The act of being created. Uh, uh, so and over there we are capable to uniting our will to the will of God the Father as well, right? For
Mm-hmm.
example of Isaac, follow example of Jesus himself. We have that capacity to align our will to God's will.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's how we kind of can make a connection to uh, our lives. Is we could try to align our will to what God's will is for us, and it relates. And like another thing that we could kind of take out of this is look at the suffering that Jesus did on the cross 2,000 years ago, and we could see that when we're suffering in the world, we have Jesus suffering with us. We have Jesus suffering through that cross with us. 2,000 years later, he's still suffering with us when we're going through hard times. But Father, how do you kind of see this relating to our personal experience or like Christian life in general?
Yeah, so for example, right, people usually come to us and ask the question like, why do I have to suffer? And the suffering is long. What is the will of God in the midst of the suffering? So, well, go back to one of the fruit of the Holy Spirit, which is longanimity, right? It's long suffering. So when we are suffering, we are not suffering for the sake of suffering itself, right? But we are suffering, we associate or we offer our suffering to the suffering of the Lord on the cross. And it just brings us hope, right? Because on the cross, the devil, they say, ha ha ha, you are about to die and you are suffered. So I win, right? But no, right? It's not a complete story about the salvation, right? So Christ died and then he resurrected, right? So he just like threw the devil off, right? The devil say, "Oh wow, you're dead, so I won." But then the final victory is the resurrection of the Lord. He conquered death, right? He conquered the desolation. He conquered the abandonment in hell. He broke the chain of hell so that he can raise everyone up. He can bring everyone back to God the Father. So when we see suffering, of course, suffering is painful, it's tough to go through, but we anchor our hope on the cross. We anchor our hope in the resurrection so that after the suffering, when we endure for a long time, at the end of the suffering, we're gonna see the moment of the resurrection. So
Yeah.
that how I take it when we have suffering in life.
And we kind of hope that this episode helped people to see and gain like a better understanding into Jesus's final moments, his death, and why it's important to us, and like why his like what the special meaning behind the words he said or the agony in the garden really meant, which I think is very important for everybody to kind of learn and get a better understanding of.
Yes, yes. Like and like we said before, like when we have any desire to learn or a desire to know about something that it doesn't make sense about the Trinity, right? Or about human will and divine will, it's good to have the conversation so that through the conversation, when Jesus say, where there are 2 or 3 people gathered, right? There's the presence of the Lord. So the Lord will use the grace to inspire us through the conversation to get to know Him more and more, and to unpack the mysterious things that we cannot know by ourselves. So keep it up.
Yeah, and kind of with that final message, we would like to thank you for listening to this episode. Please share with anybody who you think would enjoy this, and stay tuned for our next episode, which comes out October 14th.
Take care, everyone.